My name is Marcus Bennett. I'm 48 years old. And for 23 years I believed I understood the shape of my own life. I owned 5 self-storage facilities scattered across the outskirts of Tulsa, the kind of business that hums along quietly once it's built. Steel units, keypad gates, a handful of site managers who handled the paperwork while I collected roughly $18,000 a month without lifting much more than a phone to check the numbers. My wife, Renee, was an interior designer with her own small studio downtown. The kind of career that came with client dinners, fabric samples spread across our dining room table, and a calendar that seemed to fill itself faster every year. We had 2 kids, Dylan and Mackenzie, both grown and out of the house by then, and I used to tell people that Renee and I had cracked some code the rest of the world was still searching for. Stability, comfort, a house on Birchwood Lane with a paid-off mortgage, and a woman I still found beautiful after 2 decades. The first crack showed up on an ordinary Thursday in late February, and I almost missed it entirely. I was hanging up Renee's wool coat in the hall closet when a small cardstock key sleeve slipped out of the inside pocket and landed at my feet. It was from the Ambrose Hotel downtown, a boutique place known for its rooftop bar, dated 2 days earlier. When I asked her about it that evening, she barely looked up from the swatches she was sorting. She told me a furniture vendor had booked a suite there to showcase a new line of Italian sofas, and she'd stopped by between client meetings to look at fabric in better lighting than her office offered. It was a reasonable answer. Designers did that kind of thing. I set the key sleeve on the kitchen counter, forgot about it by the weekend, and told myself I was lucky to be married to someone whose job simply looked different from mine. But once you notice one thread hanging loose, you start seeing them everywhere, whether you want to or not. Over the following months, small things accumulated the way sediment builds at the bottom of a glass, invisible until suddenly the water looks cloudy. Renee started going to a boutique gym 40 minutes from our house instead of the one 2 blocks away, and she began leaving before 6 in the morning 3 days a week, always showered and dressed by the time I woke up, her hair already dry. She bought a new phone case with a fingerprint lock she'd never used before, and she started taking calls on the back patio with the sliding door shut, her voice dropping into a register I didn't recognize. Her calendar, which used to sit open on the kitchen island for both of us to reference, migrated entirely onto her phone. When I asked about her schedule, she'd give me vague answers about a big commercial project, a boutique hotel renovation in Bricktown that apparently required constant site visits, walkthroughs, vendor calls that ran late into the evening. I wanted to believe her. I think some part of me chose to believe her, the way you choose to believe a doctor who tells you a shadow on an X-ray is probably nothing. Then came the credit card statement in April. I handled our joint accounts, mostly out of habit, and one line item stopped me cold. A charge from a couple's spa retreat in the Ozarks, $640, dated a weekend Renee had told me she was staying overnight in Bricktown for the hotel project. When I brought it up, she didn't miss a beat. She said a colleague had booked the package as a client gift for her, some kind of thank you for landing the Bricktown contract, and she'd taken her business partner, a woman named Carla, along because it seemed wasteful to let the second ticket go unused. I remember standing in the kitchen holding that statement, wanting so badly for the explanation to be true that I let it be true, filed the confusion away, and went back to checking occupancy rates on my storage units like nothing in my world had shifted. The moment everything became undeniable arrived on a rainy Tuesday in June, and it happened by accident, the way these things usually do. Renee's laptop had died that morning, and she asked me to plug her phone into my computer so she could pull some files off the cloud backup before a client meeting. While the transfer ran, a notification bubble popped up on my screen from a messaging app one didn't recognize, previewing a single line of text from a contact saved simply as T. The message referenced a hotel room number and a time, nothing more, but something about the casual intimacy of it made my stomach drop before my brain had even finished processing what I was looking at. I clicked into the backup folder while the transfer was still running, and inside a hidden album labeled Fabric Ideas, I found photographs that had nothing to do with sofas or curtains. Renee in a hotel room I recognized from the Ambrose's distinctive brass fixtures, with a man I'd later learn was named Trevor Voss, a general contractor she'd hired for the Bricktown renovation 8 months earlier. The photographs weren't ambiguous. There was no vendor showcase, no innocent explanation, no story that could survive contact with what I was looking at. I sat there in my home office for almost 20 minutes without moving, the rain hitting the window, feeling something inside my chest fold in on itself. I didn't confront her that night. I told myself I needed to be smart about it, needed proof beyond a hunch, so I quietly forwarded the photos and messages to my own email and said nothing. 3 days later, I came home from checking on our Broken Arrow facility to find a note on the kitchen counter, propped against the coffee maker exactly the way you'd stage a photograph. It read that she needed to find herself, that she was sorry, that I shouldn't wait for her. Her closet was half empty. $41,000 had vanished from our joint savings account sometime that afternoon. She hadn't even bothered to deny anything, because by the time I found that note, she'd already made her choice and simply left the evidence of it lying on my counter like a receipt. The next 12 months became a blur of silence punctuated by small, cruel discoveries. I learned through a mutual friend that Renee had moved into a lake house with Trevor Voss less than 3 hours from Tulsa, funding a fresh start with money that used to be our retirement. My son Dylan, 26 and working as a pharmaceutical sales rep in Dallas, grew distant and defensive whenever I asked what he knew, always insisting his mother was going through something and needed space, as though I were the one who'd broken something rather than the one left holding the pieces. My daughter Mackenzie, 24 and teaching middle school science in Oklahoma City, cried on the phone but wouldn't tell me anything concrete either. I found out much later that both of them had been quietly wiring their mother money throughout that year, small amounts here and there, helping bankroll a version of freedom she'd stolen from our marriage in the first place. I stopped waiting for her sometime around month 4, not because the pain disappeared, but because I got tired of organizing my life around a phone that never rang. I threw myself into the storage business, expanded a 6th location out near Owasso, and spent my weekends doing the kind of physical work that leaves you too tired to think. Replacing gutters, refinishing the deck, tearing out the flower beds Renee had planted and never much cared for anyway. That's when I started noticing Priya. She'd moved into the rental house 2 doors down sometime in early spring, and for months I barely registered her existence beyond an occasional wave across the yard. She worked as a labor and delivery nurse at St. Francis, pulling rotating 12-hour shifts that left her looking perpetually exhausted in that specific way medical workers do. Steady on her feet, but hollowed out around the eyes. She was 36, divorced herself, raising no children yet but clearly good with them, based on the way she'd stop and talk to the neighborhood kids on her way to her car. One Saturday morning in late July, while I was under my truck changing the oil, she walked over holding a container of homemade lemon bars and told me, almost apologetically, that she'd noticed I was always alone and figured everyone deserved a little kindness on a hot day. It wasn't flirtation. It was simple decency, the kind I hadn't experienced from anyone in months, and it cracked something open in me that I didn't expect. We started talking on her porch most Sunday mornings, the one day her schedule reliably freed up. I told her about Renee in pieces, not all at once, the way you hand someone something fragile a little at a time to see if they'll drop it. She never did. She told me about her own divorce, a marriage that had ended when her ex-husband decided fatherhood scared him more than lying did, and about the strange relief of building a quiet life entirely on her own terms afterward. There was no pretense with Priya. She didn't perform interest in my business or my money the way I'd started to suspect in hindsight Renee sometimes had. She asked about the storage units because she was curious how a person built something like that from nothing, and she listened to the answer like it actually mattered to her. By September, what had started as neighborly kindness had become something neither of us had planned but both of us wanted. She kept a spare toothbrush at my place. I had a key to hers for the nights she pulled overnight shifts and needed someone to check on her elderly cat. There were no labels between us yet, no grand declarations, just 2 people who'd been discarded by people who should have valued them and had found, almost by accident, something steadier standing right across the street. The text came on a Tuesday evening in early October, almost exactly 13 months after Renee had left that note on the counter. I was in the garage refinishing an old dresser Priya wanted for her bedroom while she made dinner inside, and my phone buzzed against the workbench with a message from an unfamiliar number. "I'm done playing around, I want to be your wife again," it read, with a follow-up message a minute later asking if we could talk. No apology for the money. No acknowledgement of the year of silence. No mention of Trevor Voss or the lake house or the fact that I'd once sat in my office staring at photographs that ended my marriage before she'd even bothered to admit it was over. I stood there holding the phone, feeling something in me that should have been rage but was closer to disbelief, as though she genuinely believed 13 months could be waved away with a single text message. Priya found me still standing in the garage a few minutes later and asked what was wrong. I handed her the phone without a word. She read it twice, her expression shifting from confusion into something harder, and she asked, quietly, what I planned to do. I told her I wasn't going to respond, that there was nothing left to say to someone who'd waited that long only to reach out once things had presumably gone sideways with the man she'd left me for. Priya warned me that people who operate that way rarely accept silence gracefully, that I should expect this to escalate. She was right, though I didn't fully understand how right until the messages kept coming over the following days. Apologies that read more like scripts than confessions, references to how much the kids missed seeing us together, a final message insisting she'd made a terrible mistake and deserved a chance to fix it. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I called an attorney named Diane Kowalski, who specialized in cases involving abandonment and hidden assets, and laid out the entire timeline for her: the missing $41,000, the year of total silence, the photographs I'd saved from that rainy Tuesday in June. Diane told me plainly that Renee's own conduct had handed me significant leverage, that abandonment combined with documented infidelity and the unauthorized withdrawal of marital funds put me in about as strong a position as a spouse in my situation could hope for. She recommended hiring a private investigator to formalize the evidence, not out of vindictiveness but to protect what I'd built, particularly now that Priya was becoming a permanent fixture in my life. I signed the retainer that same week. The knock came on a Saturday morning in late October, 3 weeks after that first text. I was in the kitchen making coffee, and Priya was upstairs getting ready for a rare day off, her overnight bag from the week before still sitting by the bedroom door because she'd essentially been living at my place for over a month by then. The knocking was sharp, impatient, and I knew who it was before I even reached the window. Renee stood on my porch looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread, hair freshly highlighted, an outfit that cost more than most people's car payments, a tan that suggested months somewhere far warmer than Oklahoma. She called through the door that she knew I was home, that she just wanted 5 minutes, that she'd made mistakes but was ready to come back now. I didn't open the door immediately. I stood there looking at the woman I'd spent 23 years building a life with and felt nothing resembling the ache I'd carried for most of that year. Just a flat, quiet emptiness where love used to live. Behind me, I heard Priya's footsteps on the stairs, and when I turned, she was standing at the top of the landing, watching the scene unfold with a calm I found steadying. I asked if she wanted to answer it, and without hesitation, she said she would. Priya opened the door before I could reconsider. Renee's carefully composed expression collapsed the instant she saw who was standing in my house, wearing my robe, her hair still damp from a shower. Renee's eyes dropped from Priya's face to the gentle curve just beginning to show beneath the fabric. We'd learned 3 weeks earlier that Priya was 9 weeks along, the timing almost cruelly perfect against Renee's sudden reappearance. Renee's face went completely white, the practiced composure draining out of her all at once, and she stammered something asking who Priya was. Priya answered simply that she was the woman standing in the doorway of a home Renee had walked away from over a year ago, and that it was time for her to leave. Renee tried to look past her to catch my eye, but I had already turned back toward the kitchen, done giving her anything more of my attention. Priya closed the door and locked it, and through the front window I watched Renee stand frozen on the porch for a long moment before finally turning and walking unsteadily back to her car. Dylan showed up 2 days later, and he didn't come alone. His wife Nicole was with him, arms crossed before either of them even got out of the car, and I could tell immediately whose idea this visit had been. They found me in the driveway, and Dylan didn't waste time working up to his point. He accused me of replacing his mother, of moving a stranger into her house, of getting some woman pregnant before the divorce was even final. I reminded him, as calmly as I could manage, that this was my house, that his mother had abandoned it over a year earlier, and that Priya was not a stranger but someone building an actual life with me, something Renee had thrown away with both hands. Nicole interjected that people make mistakes and that a marriage shouldn't be discarded over one, and I told her that taking $41,000 and vanishing for 13 months without a word wasn't a mistake. It was a decision, made deliberately over and over again, every single day she chose not to call. When Dylan accused me of hiring a private investigator like some kind of betrayal, I told him I'd protected myself the way any reasonable person would, and that the investigator's findings included quite a bit about who his mother had actually been spending her time with while she was supposedly finding herself. He went quiet after that. Nicole tried one more angle, insisting the pregnancy didn't erase the fact that I was still legally married, that it would matter in court. I told her my attorney felt differently, and that she was welcome to discuss it with Diane directly. They left without saying much else, Nicole practically pulling Dylan back toward the car. Mackenzie reached out 3 weeks later, not with accusations but with a simple request to meet for coffee. We sat in a corner booth at a small cafe near her school on a cold November morning, and she apologized before I'd even finished sitting down, for staying quiet during Dylan's visit, for not standing up for me sooner, for sending money to her mother without ever telling me. She admitted that Renee had called her hysterical after seeing Priya at the house, insisting I'd betrayed her by moving on so fast, and that Mackenzie had almost believed it until she really sat with the timeline and realized how absurd that framing was. She told me she'd overheard her mother on a call with a friend a few weeks earlier, laughing about how predictable and steady I'd always been, saying she needed excitement, needed to feel wanted again, and that the relationship with Trevor had apparently ended badly enough that stability suddenly looked appealing once she had nothing left. Mackenzie said it made her sick to hear it, and that it made her realize Priya wasn't stealing anything. Her mother had thrown it away herself, and Priya simply had the sense to recognize what was standing right in front of her. The divorce hearing landed on a gray morning in February, roughly 8 months after I'd found those photographs on the cloud backup and nearly a year and a half after Renee first walked out. My attorney had prepared me thoroughly, though nothing quite prepares you for sitting across a courtroom from someone you built 2 decades of memories with. Renee arrived looking polished but visibly worn down, her attorney a sharp-suited man named Gregory Farr who specialized in protecting the higher-earning spouse in these situations. Though in our case that distinction no longer favored his client. I sat beside Diane, with Priya next to me despite being 7 months pregnant by then and under strict instructions from her own doctor to stay off her feet as much as possible. She'd insisted on being there anyway, and I hadn't argued. The judge, a measured woman named Patricia Renfro, reviewed the filing and noted plainly that this appeared to be a straightforward abandonment case, given that Renee had left the marital home and maintained no contact for over a year. Gregory Farr argued that his client had been navigating a personal crisis and was now prepared to seek reconciliation and counseling. Judge Renfro asked me directly whether I wished to reconcile, and I told her I did not, that I had moved forward with my life, that I was expecting a child with my partner, and that I wanted the marriage legally and completely dissolved. Diane then presented the documented evidence, the $41,000 withdrawn without my knowledge, and a thorough report from the private investigator detailing the relationship with Trevor Voss that had persisted for the better part of a year, including receipts, message records, and witness statements from people at the Bricktown project who'd long suspected something was going on. Renee's composure cracked as the folder was reviewed. When the judge asked her directly whether the information was accurate, she said only that she'd made mistakes, and the judge corrected her flatly, noting that a pattern sustained over many months wasn't a mistake but a sequence of deliberate choices. The ruling granted the divorce on grounds of abandonment and adultery. I retained full ownership of the storage business and our home. Renee received a modest percentage of the assets accumulated during the marriage, reduced by the $41,000 she'd already taken, and I kept the retirement accounts in full since I'd been the primary contributor throughout. Gregory Farr protested that the division wasn't equitable, and Judge Renfro simply replied that equity would have looked like his client returning what she'd stolen and not wasting the court's time arguing otherwise. Walking out of that courtroom with Priya's hand in mine felt like stepping out from underneath something heavy I hadn't fully realized I was still carrying. That same week, I met with Diane again and had my will rewritten entirely. Everything I owned would go to Priya and our child. Dylan would inherit nothing outright, though I set aside a modest trust for any grandchildren he might eventually have, separate from anything Nicole could access directly. Mackenzie's share was substantial, a reflection of the honesty she'd finally chosen to offer me when it mattered most. None of it was about punishment. It was about recognizing, finally, who had actually shown up for me and who hadn't. Our daughter, Sophia Grace Bennett, was born on a windy morning in early April, 6 pounds 11 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and Priya's calm, steady eyes. I held her in the hospital room while Priya slept off the exhaustion of labor, and something in my chest settled into place in a way it hadn't in years. This was what a family was supposed to feel like, not obligation dressed up as commitment, but something chosen freely every single day by two people who actually wanted to be there. Mackenzie visited that same afternoon, carrying a stuffed rabbit almost as big as the baby herself, and cried holding her new half-sister, promising to be the best big sister Sophia could ask for. Dylan didn't come. He didn't call either, though Mackenzie later told me Nicole had posted something vague online about family loyalty that I chose not to look up. I decided not to let it consume me. Dylan would come around eventually or he wouldn't, and either way it wasn't something I could force. 10 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Renee at a grocery store on the north side of town, alone, pushing a cart with only a few basic items in it. She looked smaller somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She noticed Sophia strapped to my chest in her carrier and told me she was beautiful, her voice catching slightly. She mentioned she'd heard Priya and I had gotten married the month before, a small ceremony in our backyard with Mackenzie standing as maid of honor, and she offered a quiet congratulations. I thanked her, kept my tone even, and told her to take care of herself before walking away without waiting to see if she had anything else to say. There was no anger left in me by then, no bitterness worth carrying. She had simply become someone I used to know. That evening, sitting on the back porch with Priya while Sophia slept between us in her bassinet, I found myself thinking about how completely my life had rearranged itself in the span of 2 years. How the worst thing that had ever happened to me had somehow cleared the ground for the best thing I'd ever have. If Renee had never walked out, I never would have noticed the woman across the street with the burnt cookies and the honest eyes, never would have learned what it felt like to be someone's first choice instead of their fallback plan. Priya reached over and took my hand, and I remember thinking that some doors only open because another one finally, mercifully, slams shut behind you.